All right, good evening. I want to welcome everybody to this, the fourth and final class of this series at LaRouche's on LaRouche's Principles of Statecraft. I'm Susan Kokinda with LaRouche's in the Midwest. Tonight, we're going to have I think, a very exciting presentation. Bruce Director, who has been presenting this class, is joined tonight by Miwa Steger from our West Coast operation to take the discussion in a very interesting direction. As Bruce has been developing over the past, for the first three parts of this class, he's been exploring the scientific aspects of how the human mind actually comprehends the manifold of the universe which is presented to us. And tonight, Miwa is going to bring the question of the artistic aspects of this into the discussion. I want to just locate this class, this final class in this series, in the events of the last 2 weeks, which is when we last met, having taken a hiatus for the Independence Day holiday, because it's really been a very extraordinary 2-week period. In fact, 2 weeks ago, I was down in Wellington, Ohio at President Trump's rally, which is his first return to the people, if you will, since the occupation of the White House by the avatar Joe Biden. The following Saturday, he held an extraordinary rally down in Sarasota, Florida. Between those two rallies, there could very well have been 50,000 people participating. And I think this represents maybe the word to use is regroupment, reassertion of the political momentum of the Trump movement. Now, that was followed up this week by the very important and extraordinary class action suit, which President Trump has announced against big tech, against Google, Facebook, Twitter, this entire apparatus, which, as we pointed out, is not just big tech. It's part of the surveillance state of the elites. And his class action suit is going to be, I think, opening up new ground in defense of the First Amendment and in defense of the Constitution. But one other thing I wanted to take note of, which I think is very relevant to our discussion tonight, the class action suit was announced along with the announcement of the coming into being of a new organization, which President Trump has established, called the America First Policy Institute. Their constitutional litigation section is the section which is carrying out the class action suit. But I think it's well worth it for people to look at this organization, or more importantly, to look at the significance of it, because one of the problems that Donald Trump had in his 4 years in the presidency, well, one was obvious: he was under nonstop attack from the get-go. But the other was he really did not have that deep a well to draw from in terms of people who supported his anti-establishment policies. Too often, especially in the area of foreign policy, he had to go to people who absolutely opposed what he was trying to do in terms of defense of sovereignty and reestablish normal relations with other sovereign nations. And the same was true in terms of domestic policy by and large. So the fact that he is pulling together, in a sense, a government in the wings around this America First Policy Institute, I think is a very, very important step forward in terms of preparing for us to take back our country. But the immediate relevance for tonight's discussion is that the question of policy has to extend beyond people who sit on the boards of institutes. The question of policy is really a question of you. It's a question of the American people taking the responsibility, as Abraham Lincoln did, as Bob Ingram has so brilliantly demonstrated in our Lincoln podcasts, to equip himself with the ideas, with the way of thinking needed to save the country. And that, I think, is the challenge for each one of us. Mr. LaRouche often said, you should put yourself actually in the Oval Office. What would you do if you were president? A lot of us know what we're against. We've got some slogans in terms of what we're for. But the method of thinking by which you can formulate new ideas when faced with new challenges and new crises, this is a much, much more profound question than people, I think, up until now have been willing to tackle. I think the events of the recent months, the danger to the country, the challenge to our republic is indeed causing many people to reevaluate their responsibilities. So I think tonight's discussion is going to give each one of us a better handle on how we can fulfill that responsibility. So I'll hand it over to Bruce and Miwa, and you can take it from there.
Okay, thank you very much, Susan. The issue here that I've been talking about in the last three classes, which will be built upon tonight, is, as Susan indicated, how do we think about how to deal with this situation? And right now, everybody is being bombarded with all kinds of facts, news developments, current events, things you're for, things you're against, things you're reacting to, things you're trying to deal with, anxieties and uncertainties about the direction the country is going, nervousness about the economy because of the destruction of what Biden is introducing and the growing and real inflation that people are feeling, as opposed to what the economists call inflation. It's quite ironic that what most people spend most of their money on is going way out of sight and out of reach for most people: housing, food, energy, and basic necessities. And yet they say inflation's not really a threat. So there's a disconnect between, quote, theory and reality, and people are being confronted both with the reality. Everybody listening to this show is being confronted with a reality which is bombarding them from a lot of different directions and a lot of different pieces to it, from the political realm to the physical realm and so forth. And you tend to react to each individual thing, trying to come up with an answer for each individual thing, or how do you deal with this, or how do you deal with that, how do you deal with this? And this is not only a very confusing situation, and one which I think every one of us who confronted in this experiences as a quite anxiety-raising and tension-producing state of mind. And at the same time, you don't really have a way to figure out how to deal with it, or what should be proposed to deal with it, or how do we as citizens of this country organize ourselves to join together in an effort which actually brings about not a policy, but an actual shift in the direction of the country. And that takes place over time, and it only takes place with as Susan indicated, with a change in thinking. Now, LaRouche put a lot of thought into this over the years, and he also discussed it and throughout his entire career, in every single one of his presidential campaigns, in all his work on physical economy, in everything he did in terms of the diplomatic work and the discussions with nations and so forth. And LaRouche could address this question: how do you think about the current crisis, and what is wrong with people's thinking, and what method of thinking is needed, in his discussions with leaders of nations and with ordinary citizens of every nation, especially the United States. So this is not an esoteric subject, as you'll see in our example tonight, but it's a very down-to-earth, intrinsic matter for basic human development. And we put this in the context in the first class of the idea of how do you develop the capability to navigate our way out of the crisis. And we discussed certain examples of navigation, which caused one to rethink a narrow sense of that term and realize that in order to navigate, you have to have a concept of the domain in which you're navigating. For example, how the bees have a particular mission they have to carry out for the survival of the hive. And the bees have a certain way of orienting towards the polarization of the light and communicating that and so on and so forth, and the migration of animals, which orient both towards astronomical figures as well as magnetic and so on and so forth. And then we also discussed in the second class that means you have to be able to get a sense of surveying the domain in which you're operating, and that includes not just what you see in the domain of sense perception or what you think the field of activity is, but it's what Bernard Riemann would call a multiply connected manifold of interacting principles and processes, which are all acting together, and one has to be able to take all these interacting principles and processes as a single idea into your mind, not to reduce it to something oversimplified, but to be able to deal with a complex of situations in a coherent and organized way. That's the kind of thing that LaRouche emphasized, that the study of scientific method, as I presented, is very important and helpful, not just to make scientific discoveries, but to be able to train the mind to be able to think in this way. Because every great scientist knows that you're trying to get at what's behind the domain of sense perception that's actually causing things to behave the way they are, so that you can change them. You can bring these principles under human control and act on them. And that's what science and progress is about. And then we discuss in the third class the principle of change, because you're not just dealing with how things appear, how things are acting, how things are interacting together at any given moment, but how they're changing and what direction they're changing, and how you can intervene to cause a change in a certain direction. And we discussed the idea of the need to cause in an anti-entropic direction. And this is very important because one has to have the concept of anti-entropy, or what I've called dunotropy. That is, that the universe is fundamentally creative. It's evolving from lower states of organization to higher states of organization. We know creativity from our own experience, both from our own discoveries and our own activity and what the human mind can do, and also from experiencing great creativity by our understanding and becoming acquainted with great discoveries of science and also art. So tonight we're going to look at this from the standpoint of art, because it is in the domain of artistic composition that the mind is really freed from the vicissitudes of day-to-day life and the particular things that are bombarding us. But at the same time, when we immerse ourselves in a great work of art, we are allowed in this freed state, as Friedrich Schiller, the great German poet, talked about. In this freed state, we're able to activate and develop and utilize qualities of mind, which are creativity, our own creativity itself. LaRouche talked about this as creativity per se, that this is what you want to get at, the real real understanding of what creativity is. So he always emphasized that it's the interconnected relationship between science and art, which are crucial towards the development of a competent citizenry. We saw in Bob Ingram's classes about Lincoln, this was true with him in terms of his passion for science and his passion for art, and that in Lincoln's case, great drama. But also you see this typical of all great scientists. For example, the famous case of Einstein playing the violin, Planck being a concert pianist, and this association between art and science as being essential to the development of the creative powers of the mind. Now, so tonight what we're going to do is use an example from J.S. Bach to at least give you a hint of this, with the idea that this will be a start for you so that you can pick up the threads that we throw out to you tonight and develop them and you can delve into them further. So we have the benefit of Miwa Steger helping and joining us tonight. And we're really grateful for her providing her talent and her wisdom and insights to be able to make this presentation. And we'll do the best we can between the two of us to at least give you a taste of what's really creativity per se. So the example we're going to introduce you to is a piece by Bach, which is generally known as the Goldberg Variations. It's a piece for solo piano. Of course, Bach wrote it for harpsichords because piano wasn't even invented at that time. But it's generally performed today on the piano because you have more flexibility in terms of how to articulate the notes. But it's a piece which is called Theme and Variations. So it's really 32 pieces, all connected together, 32 short pieces. And it was written by Bach. It has a whole bunch of history associated with it and stories and legends around it, but we'll skip those. You can look them up. And so it's 32, as I said, it's 32 total little pieces all all done in succession. So to perform the whole piece, it's about 80 minutes, 80 to 90 minutes, depending on the performer, or 80 to 85 minutes. So that would obviously be way too long to present in any presentation. But so we're going to actually just use three parts to illustrate the principle. Now, I want to just give a little disclaimer at the beginning that I'm not saying, Miwa and I are not saying that this is a symbolic representation of some scientific principle, or this is a symbolic representation of the way the world works or of society or anything like that. Great art is not symbolism. As LaRouche pointed out, great art is metaphor. That is, it's clothed in representations of real things. When you go to a play or a drama, there are real actors on the stage and they're portraying real people and real events, but it's all in your imagination. As Shakespeare says in the prologue to Henry V, you know, let us on your imaginary forces work. When we speak of armies, think of thousands of soldiers. When we speak of, you know, imagine their hoofs of the horses imprinting into the earth, and so on and so forth. I don't want to recite the prologue because I've forgotten it, but it's a beautiful prologue of Henry V. But Shakespeare says, we're working on your imagination. And this is what all great art works at. When you see a great painting, you're looking at, it's activating your imagination. You're not seeing a real a person or a real scene, you're seeing an image of it, and it evokes in your mind and in your imagination an image and all the things that are implied by it. So it's not symbolism, it's metaphor. It's a vehicle to be able to evoke your own imaginative capability and creative capabilities. Music has a very unique and powerful way to do this because it is abstracted from everything in the visible domain. Even music, even songs that have words which have meanings, really it's not the words and the meanings which impact you, although they play a role, but it's the effect of the music itself. And this is very powerful because every human culture has music. And the music plays a very powerful role in being able to communicate these ideas. And mankind, human beings, of course, are the only creature that actually has music. Birds sing and they sing nice things, but they just sing them over and over again. They get a little bit monotonous, as most of you have experienced. When the birds wake you up in the morning, you wish they would be quiet. But music is much different. It evokes something on a much higher level in the mind. So the Goldberg variations by Bach is based on, as I said, there are 32 pieces. The first and the last piece is called an aria. And this is sort of the opening, this sets the stage. And it's written in the style of a French sarabande, which is a slow dance. Then that's followed, those are the bookends, and there are 30 variations in between, which are set in groups of 3. And the groups of 3 are a variation on a type of popular form, like a dance or something. Then a more free-flowing form is followed by a variation based on a more free-flowing form called an arabesque. And then a canon. A canon is a round where the same melody is repeated at various intervals. People are familiar with the simple melody of row, row, row your boat, where one person starts singing, another person sings comes in a little bit later, singing the same thing, and it forms a counterpoint. And so there's a series of canons based on the interval of a unison, a second, a third, fourth, and so on and so forth, all the way up to a ninth. And then it ends with another, with a piece called a quadlibet, and I'll explain that in a little bit. So why don't we begin with the aria so that it sets the stage, and Miwa can add any introduction she wants to it, but I think you'll get the point by listening to it.
All right. In terms of speaking and playing, I'm going to have to move the microphone back and forth, but since I'm going to jump into the playing now, I mean, I don't have much to say except to re-emphasize what Bruce brought up at the beginning, which is yes, you have 32 so-called short pieces, but it is 80 minutes in length. There's a quality of development that occurs throughout the 30 variations through the re-utterance of the aria at the end that is a real delight to experience as a whole. So we encourage people to watch or listen the whole thing. We could give some suggestions as the discussion ensues. So this is the aria from the Goldberg variation.
Okay, so there you go. There's the aria. Very beautiful, beautifully played by Miwa. And there's a whole lot that can be said about this composition. It appears to be relatively simple, although it's very complex. But we'll just start with the simple, with one simple point that is essential toward the way the whole piece is organized. Now, Miwa and I will let you in on a little secret right here, which is that most people, when they listen to music, listen to the melody. And the melody in this piece is extremely beautiful. It really captures your attention, but it's not the key. The key to this piece, and as a bass player, I can attest to most pieces, is the bass line. So I want Miwa to just play the bass line of the of this aria, so that it you hear the bass line by itself.
Okay. Here we go.
Okay, now why don't you, Miwa, now play those measures, the whole piece together. You know, the play
The intro, the first 8 measures.
the first 8 measures. Just play the first 8 measures.
Yeah. Okay.
And now listen, when she plays it, listen for that bass line again that you just heard. So you can hear how the bass line is actually driving the whole piece. And the melodies are not ornaments or irrelevancies, but they're integrated into the bass line, which is driving the piece. So while your attention goes to the moving line and the melodies and so forth, it's the bass line which is actually shaping things. But it's not the bass line alone, because when she just played the bass line, it's just a descending G major scale mostly. That doesn't sound very exciting, but yet that little bass line, Bach has constructed the piece in such a way that that's what drives the whole piece. And the key to the 30 variations that make up the piece are variations on the bass line. This bass line changes in every single variation, but something about it stays the same. And that's what keeps your attention during the whole piece. So I don't know, Miwa, you want to play the aria again, and then go into the first variation, and that way people will have the aria in their head, and then you can go into it. But if you want to say something, you should to introduce that. Something to add.
As we go on.
Okay, so now what I want you to do, since we pointed out the bass line, and we've only pointed out the bass line the first 8 measures, but I don't see the point of doing all 32 measures. Baseline. Miwa will play through the aria, the first aria, the opening, the whole aria.
Yeah.
Give you a chance
without the repeats.
Without the repeats, listen to the bass line as you listen to the whole thing. And then she's going to go immediately into the first variation. And I think
we'll have something to talk about.
Then we'll have something more to talk about.
Okay.
That's right.
That's okay.
Okay,
I
so
can make the first half clearer. The second half was clearer, but I can, yeah, we'll go back to it.
okay. No, I just want to point out, to the listener that you hear now these two pieces, they're very, very different. And yet there's something about them which is the same. And if you were listening to what I said about the bass line, you can hear that there's something similar in the bass line of both pieces, which bring them together. And so now you have in your mind, it evokes a principle in your mind of things that change, but there's some underlying unity among them. And they change in a very definite direction. You hear, because you now have in your mind the experience of the aria, which has change within it. And the first 16 bars, it's repeated and it creates a thought in your mind. Then you hear the next 16 bars, which are a development of the first. And you have, so there's a change within the aria, a development. And then you get something completely different, but connected, but similar, at the same time similar because of the connection of the bass line. And the second one, which has its own internal development, but that internal development is tied to the development of the aria. And now you have in your mind the process, two types of change, the change within each aria, within each piece, and the change from one to the other. And so that creates a higher concept. And this then goes and continues for 30 or 29 other variations. So you can imagine what happens by the end, although if you know the piece, you don't have, you can imagine a little bit better. But anyway, meanwhile, why don't you add some thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll play the beginning theme, well, as it's uttered in the aria. Remember what we heard at the beginning was and I'll just play the left hand, which is where the bass theme, bass voice would exist. Oh, sorry, I'm talking to the microphone over there. I just where the bass voice would exist, just so you can hear it isolated. So. So, do you hear this? Let's see. Let me see. That's pretty much the skeleton of the bass line in the first variation. So you hear it lower as opposed to, you hear it one octave lower. He starts at one octave lower. But yet the soprano sort of ariatic theme that you hear at the beginning, you don't hear that in this first variation, which is you don't hear it. But what you do hear is the bass theme, and I'll play it a little slower so you can hear it. Bruce, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that demonstrates it quite clearly. If you to think back on the two pieces, you see that what you're experiencing is several different levels of development. The development within each piece individually, the development between the two pieces, and then the third is the development of the change between the two. Go ahead, meanwhile.
Right. No, I was just going to say that the beauty of really the human mind, that you have the capacity from hearing the beginning aria and then traveling and exploring through the 30 variations, that it's really only the human mind that has the capability of holding as a suspension the entire development as it's happening in real time. Because when you hear, as you go, seamlessly from the aria to the first variation, which is what we did, you hear a certain continuity, and you hear a familiarity with the theme that you hear at the beginning, but it's changed. It's transformed to an even higher capacity. So it's a lot more fun.
And the other point I think we should point out is that the genius of Bach, who composed this piece with all these characteristics to it, but composed it in such a way that it captures your mind. It doesn't take any work on the part of the listener to experience this great joy of his or her own creativity. Bach has opened, it's like Bach opened a door to your own mind. And if you allow yourself to be suspended from all the anxieties and things that are bombarding you and sense perceptions that are bombarding you or thoughts in your mind, and experience Bach's composition in this way, you see that you get the experience of your own creativity being a very simple, natural state to be in. It's a very natural, easy thing to experience your own creativity. And Bach, it's like he takes your hand and says, come on, I'm going to take you on a nice little journey that will show you that you can think much better than you think you can think. And at the end of the journey, you say to yourself, gee, I didn't know I could do that.
Also, it develops, listening to this music, working on it, really diving into it as knowing that you're standing on the shoulders of somebody that had a real love for mankind. It goes back to what you developed in your second class on the question of the manifolds, the curvature, and the capability of navigating through the crisis that we're currently in. How do we move out of this in an everlasting way, where we don't really have to confront the same kinds of evils, that we would be more inclined to make breakthroughs on new challenges, really break wide open the unknown. So the capacity, if young children have this accessible to them from very young age, it develops that capability and quality in their mind to think polyphonically, to be able to suspend different and many and multiple ideas in your mind at the same time without looking for an objective resolution. I think today, many people look for answers. They look for immediate gratification answers to this or that. It's either black or white. The human mind doesn't work like that. The physical universe doesn't operate like that. Music, honestly, the best is if these are able to steep within you for, I can come back to this in 10 years and it could be totally different. And I plan to. And that's the whole purpose diving into something like this, because as you grow and develop as a human being into old elderly age, these kinds of ideas have a completely different impact, and you develop different insights the entire time. So that was just
Okay, why don't we now fast forward?
just a few.
We don't want to deprive any of our listeners of the experience of all the variations, but obviously we don't have 80 minutes to stop after each one.
Oh yeah.
But we want to skip ahead to the final of one of the variations, and we'll discuss this somewhat at length to give you a sense of how Bach's ideas that are expressed in this piece, as well as all his other compositions, have actually been incorporated into our culture in a way which most people are unaware of. And how Bach integrated the culture of his time, the so-called popular culture, into this composition to in a way that would surprise every level of education and strata within the society. So this is the final variation, and it in a certain sense is different than the three groupings that I spoke at the beginning for all the others. It stands on its own, and he called it a quodlibet. You spell that Quodlibet, quodlibet. It's a Latin word, and its original meaning is a theological disputation. It literally means in Latin, whatever you please. That, you can imagine two theologians or academics saying, let's argue about how many angels dance on the head of a pin, or is God all knowing and all powerful at the same time, or some very high, difficult theological, is God perfect or self-perfecting, or some theological disputation. That's what quodlibet literally means in Latin and referred to. Around Bach's time, or a little bit before Bach's time, it took on a different meaning with respect to music, which is the juxtaposition of two or more popular tunes, in this case folk tunes, into a single musical piece. So why don't you play it, and then we'll unlock the secrets of the quodlibet.
All right, let's do it. Let's play it, and then we'll unlock the secrets. I have a score of it, but we'll put it on after I'm done with the first.
Okay. Okay, why don't you tell them the secret to the piece?
Okay. Well, the quadlibet, it was very common. Bach came from a very musical family. I just give a little background so people have a certain depth. But when he had family gatherings, they would get together and they would sing a very serious chorale, very religious. The text was very you know, holy, and they would, as soon as it was over, they would break off and incorporate these mostly comic but also very vulgar and very indecent pop songs, and they would start harmonizing and improvising, and it would just result in total laughter. It was a complete sense of humor. But the kind of humor that we're talking about is not slapstick. It's very sophisticated humor. They took something popular and they elevated it, because the mind, obviously, we need to all laugh. We need all big guffaw sometimes, actually a lot of the time. So what you hear at the beginning, I don't know if you were able to catch the theme, the baseline theme, but it's there, very prominent. So in this quadlibet, he incorporates what we've discovered is at least two very well-known folk songs at the time. And people back then would have recognized them. People today, in today's audiences, they don't know, even if you're German. But there's two folk songs, and the first one is very, I think, R-rated. It's very indecent if you get the implication. So if anybody's watching this with their family or children, be forewarned. The second folk song is pretty innocent. And I seem to have lost the, anyway, I think I have slides for this, but people, I don't need to put them up. I'll play the first folk song and I'll tell you what it's about. Mostly you hear this. You'll hear it over and over. You probably heard it. The very beginning. So this song it's called, in German, it's Ich bin so lang nicht bei dir gewesen, which means, so it's about 4 stanzas. I'll tell you what it means. Ich bin so lang nicht bei dir gewesen means I haven't been with you for so long, for such a long time. And then Rückkehr, Rückkehr, Rückkehr. So this is the beginning. Ich bin so lang nicht bei dir gewesen. And then it's Rückkehr, Rückkehr, Rückkehr. Rückkehr, Rückkehr, Rückkehr means move over, come closer, closer to me. And then there's a second part, which isn't really gone through in this, but I have to tell you what it is because otherwise you won't get the joke. It's in German, it's mit einem dumpfen Flederwisch, drupher, drupher, drupher. So it's not very literal. You kind of have to get the innuendos. Flederwisch could mean sword. It basically implies male or female body parts. And it could mean sword. Let me see. Mit einem Tumpfen. Tumpfen means damp, wet, or moist. So you can use your imagination and put 2 and 2 together. And it said that at the very end, he says, I'm sitting here basically with a damp sword. Bring your damp, feathery sword and come all the way over here to me. So I'll leave it up to you. So that goes the second, the second folk song. So that the first folk song theme is this. And you get the idea. The second one is a little bit more straightforward. So it's where is it? Kraut und Rüben. Oh shoot, where is it? I'm sorry. Give me a second. Did I misplace it? I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. Kraut und Rüben haben mich vertrieben. Hätte meine Mutter Fleisch gekocht, so wäre ich länger blieben. So I think Rüben is either beets or turnips, but we'll call them beets because that makes more sense with Reuben. So it means cabbage and beets have driven me away. Had my mother cooked more meat, I would have stayed much longer. So this is the tune of the second folk song. And there's a second part which actually Bach does incorporate into this. So it's Kraut und Rüben haben mich vertrieben, hat mein Mutter Fleisch gekocht, so wär ich länger blieben. So in English, cabbage and beets have driven me away. Had my mother cooked more meat, I would have stayed much longer. So at least you can get an idea. So so you get the second theme there. The had my mother cooked more meat, I would have stayed much longer. So in terms of the, can you put up the slide? I think it's the last slide. I've color coded it for you, for your enjoyment. No, oh yeah, the seventh one. Bingo, okay. So you can make note of this, that the yellow is the first folk song, the X-rated folk song. We'll call it the devilish one. In pink, or right below the yellow, well, I'm sorry, that's the key code. But in pink, you have the beginning, the first half of the second folk song, which is about cabbage and beets. Cabbage and beets have kept me away. Bach quotes this one many, many times. He basically exploits the second folk song. And the first folk song, he references it 3 times in the first half and 1 time in the second half. But the second folk song, he exploits sort of throughout it. And then the second half of the second folk song on cabbage and beets, if you go a little lower, you find it at the beginning, at the end of the first section, right before the repeat. So that's the, had my mother cooked more meat, I surely would have stayed longer. And then he does it again at the very end. Yeah. Now what you'll notice, which is very interesting, that the measures leading up to the very end of both halves, because this is broken up in two parts. The 2 parts of the second folk song on cabbage and beets is played simultaneously. So if you go to measure 7/8, I don't know if you have measure numbers, but right before the first bar line, right there. Yeah, so it's the one with the green on the, I don't know if you can probably see the pink on the top. but I'll just play it for you. This is the cabbage and beets have driven me away. Had my mother cooked more meat, I surely would have stayed. So it's. And you're actually supposed to play this in a funny way. It's supposed to be sort of raucous and not so-called pretty. And then he does it again at the end, measure 15, but he inverts it. What you just heard, the soprano and the tenor lines are inverted. So if you go to the very end there, yeah. Oh, sorry. Sorry, let me do that again. So that's both parts, two halves of the cabbage and beets folk song. So I think perhaps we should probably play it again, Bruce.
Yeah, why don't we play it again and go straight into the aria, which is repeated at the end, so that people can get the juxtaposition.
Recap. Okay, you can.
Yeah, and let me just point out, as Miwa did, I just want to emphasize that all this is done in connection with the original bass line. So, and you'll hear it, you'll hear as she pointed out in the beginning, you have the original bass line connects this to the beginning aria and to the bass line as it expresses itself during the intervening 29 variations. Then you get this quadlibet, and then you hear the final repeat of the aria, and which ties the whole thing together. So you're elevated to see all this transformation from the first time you hear the aria at the very beginning, and then at the end you hear it, but it has all this other material which encompasses a whole palette of musical ideas, all combined into a single interacting process in the mind. It can't be expressed any other way, but it's something you experience, and it gives you a sense of intellectual power that your mind that Bach has opened, given you a key to see what your mind is really capable of doing. So why don't we, instead of trying to express it in words, let's express it the way Bach did by playing the quadlibet and going straight into the final aria.
Okay. Okay.
Wonderful. So I think there's a lot we could say more about this, but why don't we open up for questions and we can weave our additional comments in response to the questions, unless you have something you want to say in conclusion, Miwa.
I think I said it.
Okay, so let's have questions. We'll have more to say in response to your questions.
I will. I'm sure it'll come up. Something will come up.
That was wonderful. Thank